In this video, I'm going to give you my final picks for UFC 286. We're going to look at DraftKings strategy, lineup construction, contest selection, and I have some access to free money for you, so make sure you watch until the end. As always, you can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. If you haven't already, go back and watch the predictions video from earlier in the week. That is a full card breakdown. We talk about betting, we talk about prop opportunities. A lot of information is covered in that video that is not for the final picks video. So if you haven't already, go back and watch that. That'll be linked right in the description. Also in the description is going to be a link to kunithmma.com. That's where you gain access to exclusive content like the official bets for the week, the DraftKings strategy guide, DFS projections model, access to the community, and more. The site is the best way to support the channel. So if you haven't checked it out already, again, that'll be linked in the description, and I'm going to put it in the pinned comment as well. Now we'll get into value plays. Plays at 8,000 and below, pieces that you'll need for your lineup to work salary-wise. Our first value play comes right at 8,000 with Chris Duncan. No, not that Chris Duncan, the other Chris Duncan. I really like where the line is for him from a betting perspective and how that translates to DraftKings. I thought he would be a bigger favorite in his debut, and I say that considering the matchup against Omar Morales, who is solid and technically proficient and has decent experience, but he's also 37 years old. He's not the most active, and he's coming off a knockout loss. Chris Duncan, on the other hand, has big power. He's aggressive. He's going to be moving forward, and I think he's going to test that Omar Morales chin this week. Like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, this is clearly a promotional setup spot for Chris Duncan to look good in his UFC debut. The promotion is moving on from Omar Morales. They want to bring new guys in. They want them to look good in their debut, and I think he does exactly that in front of that European crowd. And we know from a scoring perspective that he's going to score 10 points with a knockdown, and if it's in the first round, he scores another 90 points with that first round finish. And on a slate where we have 15 fights to work with, you're going to need to capture that early upside whenever possible, and this looks like one of those spots where you can do it. The winning lineup this week is going to score a ton of points, so we want to look at those who have the highest scoring ceiling possible, attack those, and I think when you look at his price, there's a great value there. If he gets that first round finish, give me Chris Duncan, yeah, that one, and probably the other one this week. Another value we can look at is Gabriel Santos in his UFC debut. He's stepping in place of Nathaniel Wood on somewhat short notice against Lerone Murphy, but I think that Gabriel Santos can win this fight. Lerone Murphy is unbeaten, but I'm really not all that high on him. I think that Gabriel Santos has the output, the aggression, the forward movement, and the tools to be able to win this fight. My problem with Lerone Murphy is that he doesn't really throw a whole lot. He's not really looking for takedowns, so he doesn't win a lot of minutes. I think that he can let minutes go by, and I think that Gabriel Santos can win. Now, it is home cooking. He might get that decision. He's going to have the crowd on his side, but Gabriel Santos winning a decision here, not out of the realm of possibility. I worry a little bit about his scoring. I don't know if the ceiling is there because Lerone Murphy's not going to be somebody who you just run through. You're not going to knock Lerone Murphy out in the first round. And the power of Lerone Murphy might make Gabriel Santos second guess closing the distance to look for takedowns as well. That's the tricky part about this slate. We have all these fights, but there's not a whole lot of underdogs that look great in my opinion. So tough spot for Gabriel Santos, but I could really see him winning, and since the underdogs don't look great on this card, he is one of the value plays this week. Now we jump 8 fighters to get to this next guy who I think has all the tools to win this fight, and he has that scoring upside that you like. Roman Dolidze is averaging 99 fantasy points in fights that he wins. He's riding a 3-fight finishing streak, and it looks like he's really hitting his stride because we know that he's a great grappler. Now it looks like the striking is catching up even more so. And he has a matchup this week where he's a sizable underdog, and I think the line is a little too wide. And I say that because he hasn't really shown any weaknesses in his last 4 fights. He dominated Star Poli with the grappling. He battered Kyle Dawkins in the clinch. Phil Hawes was able to take him down, and you might think, well, that's a weakness. He was taken down. But he's so tricky on the mat. He was able to rip Phil Hawes' knee apart, and then he got back to the feet and knocked him clean out. And Jack Hermansson was able to get him down, and if you haven't seen that fight, go back and watch that fight because Roman Dolidze, despite getting taken down, gives him that John Cena. Marvin Vettori is going to do what he always does. He's going to come at him on a straight line. He's very hittable. Roman's got that power. He's going to try to take Roman down. Roman's way slicker than he is on the mat, and I think he can match the physical strength that Vettori's going to be bringing to the table. I like the gas tank of Vettori to be better than Dolidze, but I think Dolidze could be the first guy to finish him. If he scores anywhere near his average 99 fantasy points, he's one of the best values on the slate. And our last value here is Bryan Barberena, in a fight that I'm actually changing my mind on because the line is way too wide, and the deeper that you look, Bryan Barberena might not be in as much trouble as we think. Bryan Barberena has been submitted twice in his entire career. His last fight was that second submission against against RDA, but before that, he was submitted in his 3rd fight ever. And he's been taken down countless times, and people have tried to submit Bryan Barberena, but he typically has pretty good defensive jiu-jitsu. Even in his fight against Leon Edwards was looking for submissions, and he just couldn't tie one up. Even when he went to war with Vicente Luque, multiple times Luque was trying to tie up a submission, and he just couldn't. And now he faces Gunnar Nelson this week, who's going to look to take him down. He's going to look to wrap up that neck. That's what Gunnar Nelson does best, but Gunnar Nelson hasn't had more than 1 win in the last 4 years. On top of that, Gunnar Nelson's a counter striker who's going to stand right in front of Barberena this week. I think Barberena has slightly more power in his hands. He definitely has the better output, and I would say that he probably has the better cardio as well. If this turns into a gritty dogfight, I definitely favor Bryan Barberena, just because despite his bad takedown defense, he is able to work back to his feet pretty effectively. And if he can do that this week and weather that early storm that I think Gunnar Nelson's going to bring to him in the grappling, and I think he's going to touch Gunnar Nelson up, and he probably puts him away late. When you're talking about Bryan Barberena, you're talking about some scary output. 61 strikes in 2 rounds against Dos Anjos is low for him. Before that, 141, 186, 134, 114, 175, 122, 195. The dude's putting a ton out there. You might look at this and say, well, that's 31, but then you look right over here and realize that he was able to knock Jake Ellenberger down twice and knock him out in the first round, scoring 120 DraftKings points. So I am going to flip the pick there. It's not going to be Gunnar Nelson by submission, because Gunnar Nelson might not be the Gunnar Nelson of old, but we know exactly what we're going to get with Bam Bam Barberena, and I think he brings the noise this week. I like the striking advantage. I love the output. From a scoring perspective, I think he can score a lot of points, not only with that output, but also with a 2nd or 3rd round finish, sprinkle in a knockdown as well. You're in a good spot. So give me Bam Bam Barberena to win this fight, and he's one of the better value plays of the week down at his price. Now we can get into building some lineups. We'll start with cash game lineups, but before we do, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, comment something for the algorithm, because well, you know how the algorithm works. This week for cash games, the formula's simple like it is in most weeks. We're going to stack the main event to start. Kamaru Usman is 8,900 this week. Then we'll come down here and grab Leon Edwards for 7,300. What I'd like to do in this situation is I come down here and I punt one of the cheaper plays that I think doesn't get finished this week. I do think that Filho might get dominated or finished. Same with Makwan Amirkhani. I'm not really all that confident in Hardy to get much going. Same with Gordon. Barberena is an option, but I like Roman Dolidze at 7,100 for your cash games this week. Now, like we always talk about with cash games, 50-50s, head-to-heads, double-ups. These aren't the big tournaments that you're trying to win all the money from. These are games where you can double your entry. So you don't need the perfect lineup. You don't need 6 winners. You don't even really need 5 winners most of the time. 4 will do. So what you could do is come up here and say, let me get Christian Duncan, Rafael Fiziev, and let me get Sam Patterson. You've left 200 salary on the table. This is fine. You've got 1, 2, 3 big favorites, a guaranteed winner in the Kamaru Usman Leon Edwards fight, and then if Roman Dolidze wins, then you're in a great spot, but you don't need him to win. And I want to take a second to talk a little bit about cash games and bankroll management. If you don't want to hear this, you can go right in the description, go to tournament lineups and hit that timestamp and you'll hop to the next piece, but this is something that I want to talk to you about. If you're watching, I want to talk to you about this. So when you are playing DraftKings and you are a smaller bankroll player, and I mean somebody who doesn't have thousands of dollars in your DraftKings account, then you need to be playing cash games. Even if you are a larger bankroll player, playing cash games is still something I'd recommend, but if you're a smaller bankroll player, play cash games. And I'm going to give you a perfect example as to why. So let's say, for example, you have $25 in your bankroll. That's how much you're willing to spend to enjoy yourself with DraftKings while you watch the fights. Now, if you have $25, you can make one lineup and put it in the big contest this week. Here's the payout structure for the big contest. $150,000 to first place. Your $25 turns into $150,000. Yes, that would be amazing, life-changing money. However, if you just have one lineup and you enter into this contest, the odds are really stacked against you. This contest allows for 32,941 total entries. So not only are you just one of those entries, but you're also competing against people who have 10, 20, 50, 100, 150 lineups. Now, one could make the argument, oh, I don't need to come in first place. I can still make money with my one lineup. You see here, 60,000 to second, 30,000. You even come down here and there are people making $1,000 from this contest. Now, the lowest possible prize is $40, which is still more than your 25. That's good. But you need to come in 6,643rd place at a minimum to get that $40. So we'll break down a little math as to why that's difficult. So if we look at 6643 divided by the total amount of people that are in this contest, you're looking at 20%. So this contest only pays out the top 20%, which means your lineup needs to beat around 26,300 people to get that $40. Now, if you wanted to double your entry, you need to come in 2,943rd. That's to double your entry. So if we do that divided by the amount of people that are in this contest, you're looking at the top 8.9% of the contest, which means your lineup has to be roughly better than 30,000 other lineups for you to make $50, for you to double your entry. The hard part about that is that you are going to need a minimum of 5 strong winners in your lineup and a loser that probably scores decent. But with 15 fights, the chances are you're probably going to need 6 winners in your lineup. Now let's compare that to a cash game for the same entry for $25. This is the payout structure for a $25 entry double up competition with 91 participants. So if there's 91 participants and you need to come 40th, that means that your lineup needs to beat 51 other lineups for you to double your money. So what do you think is easier, beating 30,000 lineups or beating 51 lineups? Oscar, don't even try to answer that question because you're going to give me the wrong answer and I'm going to get mad. You've been having a good week. You did well editing the last video. Stop it. Obviously, it's much easier to beat 51 people than it is to beat 30,000 people. And in this contest of beating these 51 people, you need about 4 winners in your lineup because believe it or not, the contests that you're in, when it comes to cash games, a lot of these other players aren't building lineups properly. You see a whole lot of people building tournament style lineups in cash games and they have 3 winners and they're at the bottom of the cash game. Realistically, if you build your lineup the right way, you get your 4 winners, you get those safe scoring floor kinds of fighters as well, and in the losers, then you're in a good spot and you show up in the top 50% of those contests and you double your money. And if you're building your lineups properly with the formula that we break down week in and week out, you will win your cash games more often than not. And you'll be able to build up your bankroll. That way you're not depositing, because if you're in that vicious cycle of deposit, enter, lose, deposit, enter, lose, that's the fastest and easiest way to burn money with this kind of game. It's a great game and it's a lot of fun and you can have success with it, but if you don't know how to play the game and you aren't managing your bankroll, it's not a game that you're going to be able to play for all that long. And if you're having trouble understanding what I'm explaining to you right now, that's fine. You can send me a message on Twitter and I'll be happy to explain it to you. I don't like seeing people get caught up in that vicious cycle of depositing every time that they want to play DraftKings. If you're depositing every time the fights come around, it's because you're doing something wrong. And it doesn't mean that you're bad at DFS or you don't know how to pick fights. It's just you need to do a better job of understanding what it is your goals are when you're playing this game. Is it just to have fun while you're watching the fights? If so, cool. Do you want to make a little bit of money while you play this? That's very possible. Do you want to make a lot of money while you play this? That's possible too, but you need to be able to protect your bankroll, build it, and then use that to play in these bigger contests. If you made it through what I just talked about, hats off to you. It's just something that I feel I need to talk about every so often, something that a lot of people in this space don't talk about, but it needs to be something that's discussed every now and again. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about right now, I'm either just not explaining it well or it's getting lost in translation with the video, but you can send me a message on Twitter and I'll explain all this again in simpler terms or different terms or whatever. But that's just something that I want to make sure everybody watching this video understands. I'm done talking about it. I'm sorry. Back to the fun stuff. Now, when it comes to your tournament lineups, I think there are a lot of ways that you could go this week with so many fights, but I want to start by going over 2 fighters who are popular that I will not put in my lineups. The first one is Marvin Vettori, because Marvin Vettori in 3-round fights is not really scoring all that well. So we see 15 points in a decision loss to Robert Whittaker, 65 points against Sanchez, 81 points against Ferreira, 37 points in a decision loss against Stylebender. This was a split decision, really could have went either way, and if he won, it would have been 67 points. Same deal with Omar Akhmedov. It's a draw. If he wins, it's 64 points. Against Miranda, he scores 82 points, and he wasn't winning this fight against Shoeface, but he scores 36 points in a loss. I don't think a ton of people are going to be playing Marvin Vettori as it is, but at 9,100, the chances of him scoring 91 points to me seem very, very low. If he does, this will be the first time in his UFC career that he's scored that many fantasy points in a 3-round fight. He's scored a lot of points in 5-round fights, but he doesn't have 5 rounds to work here. He's got 3 rounds to work against a guy who has a lot of power and a guy who's going to be tricky and hard to keep down on the mat. So I'm not going to play any Marvin Vettori this week. Another guy I wouldn't touch with a 10 10-foot pole this week is Rafael Fiziev, who I think probably wins this fight, probably wins by knockout, but at the same time, he's probably going to carry a lot of ownership, and I don't think he's going to score that well. He doesn't throw a ton of strikes. Now, he's going to be forced to when Justin Gaethje's taking the fight to him, but he doesn't really typically throw all that much. On top of that, one thing that's common from his 3 knockouts in the UFC is that he hasn't had more than 1 knockdown. He gets a knockdown and knockout finish over Mokaev. It's a standing TKO against Brad Riddell, and we've seen Justin Gaethje standing TKO'd before. And then he knocks out RDA late in that fight in the 5th round. He's not going to be shooting for takedowns either. I think even if he did shoot for takedowns, Justin Gaethje would be able to stuff them. I think that he probably knocks Justin Gaethje out in, say, the 2nd round. A standing TKO would not surprise me at all. This is a striker versus striker matchup, and I will take the much better striker versus the guy who's been rocked time and time again. But I think a standing TKO in the 2nd round or a knockout in the 3rd round nets him around 80 to 90 DraftKings points at most. We've seen this guy put up 72 points multiple times, 3 times in the UFC. We've seen him get a finish and score 72 points. We've seen him get a finish and a knockdown and score 87 points. So not somebody who I'm going to hang my hat on this week, and he's definitely going to come in at a lot higher ownership than Marvin Vettori. I think Marvin Vettori gets a little bit nothing crazy, but Fiziev is somebody who a lot of people are going to click on this week. And outside of his fight with Renato Moicano, he hasn't paid off his salary once, and I don't see him doing that again this week. But with that being said, we can build some lineups that you might see often in your tournaments, and I think Fiziev is probably somebody who shows up in a lot of tournament lineups this week. I think if you come down here to some of the cheaper plays, I think Leon Edwards is going to be super popular this week. Chris Duncan could be had for 8,000. You can have Ludovic Klein. Casey O'Neill typically scores a ton of points. Now you have 9,000 left over. If this is somebody's lineup, they're probably going to come right up here and grab Sam Patterson, or they might try to be sneaky, leave some salary on the table and take Christian Duncan. But that's not the kind of lineup that I would want to bring this week. I don't think that Fiziev makes a whole lot of sense in your lineups, especially if you have 100 salary left over and Leon Edwards isn't in your lineups. You might as well plug in Kamaru Usman. If we just take a look at the points that Kamaru Usman has scored in his UFC career, it's crazy. 98 points in a loss against Leon Edwards. So if he didn't get knocked out, if he went that other 52 seconds and didn't get knocked out and didn't even land another punch, he scored 128 points. 113, 104, 104, 156, 130, 168, 195, 80 here in a 5-round decision win over Damian Maia. But then he has 126, 107, 106, another 85 score. This isn't a 3-round fight. 118, 114, 119. The guy breaks 100 points in his sleep. Kamaru Usman is a staple in your lineups this week at only 8,900. And you got to think too, Kamaru Usman's not going to waste any time trying to strike this week. I think Kamaru Usman is going to try to hold Leon Edwards down even more so than he did in the last fight. And you got to think Kamaru Usman doesn't want no problems on the feet. He's not going to sit there and try to strike with Leon Edwards because it's a mistake. And I say it's a mistake because of what happened in the last fight. I don't think that Leon Edwards is some kind of knockout artist by any means. We talked about this in the predictions video, 3 knockouts in his entire UFC tenure. He's not somebody who's knocking guys out. He's not knocking guys dead all that often. So I don't think that Kamaru Usman's in all that much danger on the feet, but I can't see him get outpointed, outstruck, and he's going to be at a speed disadvantage when it comes to the striking. So I think the adjustment that he makes this week is riding out position more. I think about halfway through the last fight, he started feeling himself a little bit, let Leon get up, start landing some strikes, but the strikes that he was landing, man, if you go back and watch the fight, Kamaru Usman was landing some of the weakest, worst punches at the weirdest angles that I've ever seen. He looked like he was landing with his wrist. He looked like he wasn't turning over on anything. It looked bad when you look at some of these sequences when Leon's covering up against the fence and Kamaru Usman's just kind of throwing whatever at him. And he didn't do a good job of digging the body either. Leon was keeping that high guard and Kamaru Usman could have just started digging to the body, but he didn't. He threw those weird punches up top. He was trying to grab the back of the head and throw those uppercuts, but he looked like he was like scooping water out of a bucket or something. They looked bad, man. And we've seen his striking look sharp in the past, but in that last fight, it looked terrible. And I don't want to see him standing up with Leon Edwards if he's going to be throwing that garbage out there. So I think Kamaru Usman wins. I think he's somebody you need in your lineup, but Usman, don't play around. You better get that guy in the ground, not let him up. But we have 82-20 left over. I think if I came down here and I grabbed somebody like Roman Dolidze, for example, let's say I grabbed Ludovic Klein, Casey O'Neill, 85.50 left over. What I could do is come down here and I could grab somebody that's relatively inexpensive, maybe like a Bryan Barberena, for example. And now I can come all the way up here and grab somebody like a Jack Shore or maybe even Muhammad Mokaev. This to me makes a lot of sense because you have that high scoring ceiling, the highest ceiling on the card from Kamaru Usman. You've got Roman Dolidze with that finishing upside. You've got Ludovic Klein, who I think wins by knockout. Casey O'Neill, we've seen Casey O'Neill put up Kamaru Usman numbers in her 4 UFC fights. She's somebody who should come in at pretty high ownership, but I don't know if she will. I think Casey O'Neill goes under-owned this week. I see a lot of love for Jennifer Maia out there, which I think is unjustifiable to say the least. But Casey O'Neill is a dog, and she's making her comeback in this fight in front of that European crowd. I think she's going to look to make a statement. I think she can take Jennifer Maia down at will. Jennifer Maia's striking looked good last time against Marina Moroz, but Marina Moroz is not a world beater. She beat Maria Agapova, but that's not saying anything. So this to me looks like a pretty good lineup, and obviously with 600 salary left over, you can make some adjustments if you'd like. Another way that you could attack this lineup is by attacking the guys that have big grappling advantages and good matchups. So for one, you have Juliana Miller. She's going to have a huge grappling advantage. Same with Jake Hadley, and if you started your lineup with these two, you're not going to have many people running the same thing you are, especially in, say, single entry contests. 7,800 left over. Let's say you liked Justin Gaethje, for example, just to give you another look, because I don't want to just put the people that I think are going to win in there because that kind of limits the looks that you can get. So let's say you wanted Justin Gaethje in there, because I know there's some Gaethje fans out there that are rooting for him this week. Let's say he gets it done. Let's say, for example, you also want to run with Leon Edwards, just to give us a little bit of salary to work with. So you take Chris Duncan, now you've got 8,600 left over. We just talked about this. This is a Casey O'Neill spot. One guy that I want to talk about a little bit while I'm looking at it is Sam Patterson. So Sam Patterson, I thought about this long and hard. He's going to be somebody that gets a lot of ownership, and he probably should because he's a finishing machine. But if you just think for a second, if Sam Patterson lands about 20 strikes in the first round, and then say the fight gets extended into the second round, and Yanal Ashmoz shoots for a takedown, and Sam Patterson snatches up one of those guillotines like he's wont to do and gets a quick tap. Well, if he lands about 20 strikes, and they're all considered significant, that translates to 8 points. And if he gets a second round finish, that's 70 points. And if he doesn't get any takedowns, he scores 78 points in a fight that he could be dominant in and finish relatively early if you consider the second round early. That's not great. I don't know if he's going to be the one moving forward and being the aggressor here, and I don't know if he's going to be the one looking for takedowns. He really likes that defensive guillotine. Ashmoz is aggressive and is going to be looking for takedowns of his own. I could see him winning by guillotine and not scoring that many points. It reminds me a little bit of the situation that we had with Michael Johnson and Thiago Moises a couple of years ago, where Moises landed one strike in the first round and then he secures a heel hook at the beginning of the second round. He scored 70 Draftkings points with a second round finish. You get 70 points for scoring a second round finish. So he could look good and he could totally go out there and win inside the distance, but he might not score that well. But to get another look, let's say we went with guys that have really good knockout upside. So we know that Christian Duncan has that knockout upside. We know that Ludovic Klein's got that knockout upside. Same with Chris Duncan. Let's say you wanted to take Lerone Murphy for that knockout upside as well. You come down here, let's say you grab somebody like Justin Gaethje, for example. I think if Justin Gaethje wins this fight, it's because he knocks him out. You got 9,200 left over. I think at this point, since you don't have Edwards, you just grab Kamaru Usman for that scoring floor. Another way that you could get super different this week, this is a real risk-reward kind of deal, but if you went with Juliana Miller, you came down here and grabbed JoJo Wood, and just take a second to look at some of the work that JoJo Wood could do. If you look at her fight against Jessica Eye, a performance like this where she's just letting him go. If you look at her fight with Jessica Eye, a performance like this where she's just letting him go, and Luana Carolina is a willing dance partner who's going to stand right in front of her and let her do that, she could break 100 DraftKings points. It's very possible. She might even look for takedowns in this fight and stay busy on top. Let's say you went with Juliana Miller, women's MMA, huge grappling advantage, probably not going to be as highly owned considering that Jack Shore, Jake Hadley are right there. And then you went with Casey O'Neill. You had 3 women in your lineup, you're way different. 7,800 left over. I'm going to come right down here and grab Bryan Barberena. I'm going to run it again down here with Roman Dolidze, and I'm going to grab the best matchup on the card with Jake Hadley. No one's bringing this. You're really worried about the two underdogs for sure, but this is super different. If you ever want some one-on-one advice in terms of just what should you be doing with your lineup based on the contest that you're in, you can always send me a direct message on the Kunith MMA website, and I'll be able to tell you what I think. You can also lean on the DraftKings strategy guide. That's been absolutely money for cash games. It's been good for tournaments, especially when we look at the fights that you need to target. The fights that we wanted to target last week that were in that guide were Petrino and Anton Turkalj, as well as Josh Fremd and Dumas, and we called Josh Fremd, we called Petrino. Both of them scored really well, so if you watch the videos and you have a membership and you saw the strategy guide and you use that, you probably did well yourself. And now we can wrap this up by looking at props on the Underdog Fantasy website. They also have the app. They will match your deposit up to $100 by using code Kunith or by using the link that you're going to see in a pinned comment. They also offer insurance, so your entry doesn't need to be perfect. You can go 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5. It's a fun way to play, and it's a way for you to build up your bankroll as well. And they offer this for all kinds of sports. Every sport that you can imagine is on there essentially. Now my favorite pick'ems of the week: higher on strikes for Ludovic Klein, same for JoJo Wood, lower for Jake Hadley because I think he's going to lean on his grappling a lot and probably find a submission round 1, round 2. Lower than 4.5 takedowns for Muhammad Mokaev. I know that he's rinsing and repeating takedowns against everybody, but I think that fight probably doesn't see the second round. He's either going to get finished by that tough Brazilian or he's going to find a submission of his own. And then Omar Morales under 34.5 significant strikes because Chris Duncan's there to be hit, but he's also there to lay that wood. So one of those guys gets knocked out, and it probably happens early, so I don't think he's going to break 35 significant strikes. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something if you're new, and I will see you next week.